piece around, the neurobio economy and who are actually the drivers of it, who's regulating it, who are the benefactors from it. What happens to those who can't afford the wearable technology, and how can it be made affordable?
So I guess you have all the questions. I don't need to do anything.
No, I don't. You can steal any of them that you want.
I'm just going to put.
Do you have a particular one you want me to start with?
No, I have a very technical question. I used to work with the guy who did a lot of with the guy who worked with the spinal cord, like a 3D things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious, where Justin thinks, where is this technology, like a regeneration of the scans versus other things. Let me put Jake somewhere. So I think that's them. And I just send the forms to the waiting room people. So
okay, yeah, if they get to it, that's awesome. All righty, so
we have 2 minutes left. So
I love my experts.
Well, it's definitely not boring as the usual joke.
No, hey, I don't think I've had a boring edge. My dog is crying outside my door.
I will get her treats. Okay.
You need to get her treats. She's being excluded. You didn't see Dr. G's dog. He has a black Great Dane, and the dog's face is like the size of Dr. G's face. I mean, he's huge. He's absolutely huge. He put him on camera. It was very cute.
Mm.
All right. Yeah, so throw your technical question in there somewhere.
It's okay. Well, Karen is always on our things.
I invited her. Well, we talked to, she can keep sort of becoming a champion, hopefully, of our group. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm like surprised how, by the reliability.
Mm-hmm. People are interested in what we've got to deliver on these kinds of programs. That's another question. Who else is out there really talking about it in a way that the public can gain information from it and create opinions around it, and then take action.
Oh, look, we have an actual uptake on our website as well.
Good. So every little bit helps. I think we're about a minute out from them coming back. Oh, less.
I wrote a couple of quotes from our speakers, so we can throw it on the social media later.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good luck.
And we'll don't be a hater.
I'm going to be a recluse. I have work to do. I have schoolwork to do.
Okay. I'm closing the breakout rooms in 1 minute. Oh, there's this delay.
I know.
I programmed that it should close.
I think people always start coming back when that comes up. So,
which can be a good or bad thing, right? Wow, let me get out of there.
We'll let everyone come back. We'll show them the rules. We'll just talk about the rules. We don't even have to show them. Welcome, Corey. Good to see you. Karen. Brian, welcome. Corey left us.
I think he has a problem with the headset. That's what we're sort of talking in the background. So we'll try to find which side is broken. Okay.
All right. I think we have everyone back. No, not everyone. Everyone? Okay. So let's get started. So hopefully you've all had a chance to discuss some of the topics that you've heard today. some of the questions that are looming, and then some of the everyday work. So we're going to start out a question for Dr. Sanchez and Dr. Giordano. What keeps you up at night on all that you're doing? What keeps you up or wakes you up early? Those 4 a.m. wakings. Which one is it? Tell me.
Yeah, Jim, I'll take a lead off on this one. I really worry about the hype curve on neurotech. There's a lot of just kind of loose commentary out there about it. And I think grounding that commentary is really necessary. And one of the things I tried to show the group today was real neurotechnology and real people using it in very well-defined environments so that you could see with your own eyes what it is and what it does. There are just so many promises out there about neurotechnology. And to me, those are just promises. It's very different than the people that are actually doing it and are delivering those technologies in the real world. Jim, over to you if you want to get a word in.
Oh, we can't hear you.
I'll run with that because, my thought is that overestimating neuroscience and technology represents, if you will, the opposite bedfellow of underestimating neuroscience and technology. So in some ways, what keeps me up at night and my worries represent sort of the polar opposite of those things that are primary to Justin's concern. One of the things that I've found is that although there's a tremendous amount of neuro hype, in other words, neuro gullibility, and really, if you will, exaggeration, if not amplification of what the brain sciences can do, neuroscience fiction, I think there's also been a relative skepticism against what the neurosciences actually can do or could do, in part because there's this feeling, well, okay, we're really not quite there yet. Well, in some cases, it's not a question of whether we're there yet. It's a question of appreciating whether we're there yet to be able to understand the actual capabilities versus limitations of the tools we have. And part of it goes along with what our group has referred to as Icarus folly. In other words, the hubris thinking, yeah, we know what's going on here. Well, do we really? And what's equally dangerous is to create a tool and think we know what it does when in fact we don't. So it really exists along the same continuum of appreciative knowledge of what the brain sciences can realistically do or not, which is why when Justin and I were working to develop OnRamp, one of the first things that we demanded was responsibility for realistic assessment of the science and tech. Last thing in the world you want to do is keep yourself up at night worrying about the sky is falling, Chicken Little, or crying wolf. But I also don't want to be surprised when the neurotech shows up at my door and I had no idea it was coming.
That's great. It's interesting to think around the work that DARPA has done and other agencies and the interdisciplinary approach to this and many other emerging technologies. One area of interest for our group is always the global aspect. How does it look globally? Are the same regulations there? Are there regulations? Who are the gatekeepers? Can you talk a little bit about that and any partnerships or collaborations you may have or be aware of?
Justin, I'll take that and then I'll hand that one over to you because I know you two have worked in the international forum quite a bit. That's an important point. As I alluded to, brain science is becoming a multinational enterprise. And in that multinationality, you have literally two iterations. Number one, intra-national efforts and interests in the brain sciences. In other words, within a particular country and culture with regard to its needs, values, wants, and desires of what the brain sciences can obtain and achieve. And then the international piece, in other words, the exchange piece. But where it can become problematic is according to three primary levels. Number one is the purely technical. In other words, are we striving towards interoperability? What we do here, will that function well with what they do there? And if not, is this also a means and mechanism to create particular forced dependencies? In other words, your system won't work with my system, so you got to use my system. The other issue is one of proprietary information and hegemony and leveraging. In other words, intellectual property and the relative commercialization of brain sciences and technology, so that there's not necessarily the sharing per se, but rather there's really a reinforcement of market values of relative supply versus incurred demand. And then who gets the goodies? And what does that then mean, as I said earlier, for those neurotechnological haves versus the have-nots, not only within countries, but between countries? And then the last point certainly is, what does that mean for cooperation? Given the fact that we know there's going to be competition, because that's part of the general market of science and technology writ large, which may then prompt the need for something which is referred to as co-opetition, cooperative competition, whereby particular parameters and domains of the scientific and technological space are discussed dialectically to be able to determine who gets what and why. Justin, over to you, sir.
Yeah, the dimension I was going to put on this question regarding international space, I think neurotechnology is a technology which there really is an international race for, but it's kind of below the radar. Like the people that are in the field and people that are paying attention, yeah, they kind of know about it. Is it on like international, people's minds that neurotechnology is this next thing that is going to change the world? Probably not. And as Jim mentioned in his talk, was there were neuroscience initiatives that occurred in the early 2010s, but you don't really hear too much about those anymore. But they were an accelerator to get countries across the globe working in this space. And there's low-level activity happening. And the part that we shouldn't all be surprised about is, as that reaches critical mass, or certain countries, the haves or the have-nots, reach critical mass with their technologies, what are the international implications of that? And that's something that needs to be more on the radar than less on the radar as it is today.
It's interesting that you say that, because we see so much of that activity around artificial intelligence. So you saw it come up and out, and then you saw groups grab onto the ethical issues around it and really bring it to the forefront. You saw Europe looking at regulations, creating real form and structure around that technology. You saw the US try to pick up on that as well, and sort of it all sort of bubbled up. And the tipping point, I think they reached the tipping point in terms of some understandings around ethics, around legalities, things like that. So talk to us about local access. Access meaning, how do patients access these technologies? How does a patient become a candidate for any of these, whether it's the animating of your own sort of body parts or some type of implant?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim. You take a first shot at it.
Yeah, what I'll do, I'll introduce it, because then really over to you, because that was a major component of your work. I know at DARPA, and certainly now at Battelle, is creating affordable and efficient access, right, for those who need it. I mean, that's what's called commutative justice, providing those in need what they need. But let's be realistic. I mean, we understand there's also a distributive factor. In other words, limited resources, and the fact that there's an increasing demand for these as the capability of the science and technology gets ever more viable, and in many cases, therefore, more valuable, right? So I think one of the issues there is also gaining the recognition by those parties that are responsible for subsidizing both the research and its applications, that these technologies, A, are here and now, and B, have demonstrable benefit. I mean, I can tell you with some of our own work with the FDA, regulatory agencies, and also with insurance agencies, the need to streamline the process, for example, of what represents an investigational device exemption, what represents a humanitarian use exemption, if you will, facilitating that pipeline with the FDA and other agencies as well, has been something I know Justin worked with very, very hard and actually materialized. I mean, his work at DARPA was very important, working with the FDA to streamline their process for approval of devices, not only for a specific label indication, but for broad indications. And that's been useful. But I think more of that needs to happen. And so it's not a question of just beating the drum, and I'll allude to Justin's expert capability as a drummer. It's continuing to beat the drum with a changing rhythm so as to be able to engage those individuals doing the dance. I couldn't have set you up any better, buddy. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So first off, equity is absolutely a critical aspect of neurotechnology moving forward in the future. So we've got collectively that we need to figure out as leaders in this field and as a society how to deal with it. What Jim was also framing was neurotechnologies right now, for the most part, are still a curiosity. They're new and emerging. Most of the people that you see using neurotechnologies are going through investigational device exemptions that are granted by the FDA. And as Jim also said, we created pathways that could accelerate those kinds of regulatory pathways. We are still not at a point where any person in America or any person in the world can go in to see their neurologist and neurosurgeon. Let's say they're living with a condition that they could benefit from this, and they could get prescribed the technology and just get access to it. The only kind of examples that I know that have made it to that level are deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease, or maybe even cochlear implants are also a technology that have matured to a point where there's a regulatory pathway, there are manufacturers, there are physicians that are all kind of working together, and even reimbursement and insurance support to make those medical therapies accessible and viable. I think a lot of the other neurotechnologies, at least that you saw in the videos I showed you today, they still need to make their way through all of that. And that's something that I've been working on since leaving DARPA, is how do you make this into a sustainable technology that not only people want because the benefits are there, but there's also all of the other support that is needed to make them accessible to people. And that's a work in progress. There's a lot more to be done. And I think it's also an aspect that a lot of neurotechnologists underestimate as a part of the whole equation of things.
So I have to say it's fascinating. I have tons of questions. I have maybe one or two. I know Chris might have a technical one he might want to throw in there, but a quick one around Dr. G, you talked about, the runaway tech and the runaway desire. Justin brought up sort of this social understanding of, the sci-fi aspect of it and these claims. Where's the line? We saw some incredible activity in these videos. Mm-hmm. Where's the line, and who holds that line for us as humanity? Where we're going to lose ourselves between mind and brain?
I know, brilliant question. I mean, and let me see if I can tie in, Justin's conceptualization as well. Both Justin and I are intimately aware and very sensitive to the idea of what constitutes neuroscience fiction and what constitutes neuroscience fact. And I must tell you, in some cases, that boundary is a fuzzy one, right? Mm-hmm. Not to say that if it can be conceived, it can be developed. But I mean, working at DARPA, for example, the idea of being able to realize a concept within 60 calendar months, that's axiomatic to the process, right? So it's very rapid translation. But let me use a science fictional example to be able to provide that exemplar of what we mean by runaway and what it actually incurs. A great science fiction film, although not necessarily dealing with the neurotechnology, but with the neuroscientific development, was the film Limitless, starring Bradley Cooper, right? Mm-hmm. Robert De Niro. But it was a play on words with regard to the title. Understand, the actual effect of the drug was not limitless, but the desire for that drug and what it meant, mm-hmm. the implications, if you will, became limitless. And so what it does, it essentially shifts the threshold for uptake and use. We talked about escalation and brinksmanship. Once again, you get a very demand side economics. And so one of the runaway effects is you get saturation of a relative market because something is good. And then what you see is this interesting dance between desire and development. We want more. Can you do more? Let's face it. I mean, if you remember cell phones when they first came out, they were the size of a Volkswagen. And now, well, everyone's got one. And it's interesting because we see as the technology readiness level increases, in some cases, the technology acceptance level increases, which then increases the valuation, what we call the value desiderata, the desire for that technology, which then to create novelty spawns new technology. So we need to be mindful of those runaway effects, not only in terms of their science fictional attitudes and aptitudes and what represents fictional ideas on the part of the public of what the science can do, but the neuroscience and neurobioeconomic factuality of what that might incur and how that may need to be gatekept.
One part that I know and I've learned is extremely important is to have the open dialogue and to make sure that the technologists are not just the ones deciding on where the line is. It's for society to decide, it's for the ethicists to decide. It's like this open conversation of those experts that understand all the dimensions of it have to have a voice at the table. And I've always worked really hard to try to protect having that conversation because it helps us to land in places where we want to be more functional as a society, as opposed to being encumbered or hurt by technologies as a part of our everyday life.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think it also, those conversations bring us to looking at the unknowns, right? To getting closer to understanding all of sort of that fringe thinking. And that's certainly something that comes up here at EDGE a great deal, not only the actual science of it all and the ethics, but that line and what that line means, whether it's ethical or humanitarian, sustainability, and things of that nature. Chris, you want to throw anything in? We're coming just past the 3 o'clock hour.
Just have one very brief question. So if those technologies seems to be somewhat, they have a somewhat potential limitless of, danger inclusive, then why not to develop something else? For example, Justin, we're talking about, you show all those examples of how the people can regain the spinal cord function, or at least supplements the spinal cord. Why not to, for example, invest all the money in the 3D technologies or the bioengineering, which seems to be somewhat safer, or at least avoid some of this significant and profound implication?
Yeah, what's interesting is, again, being a technologist, I always look at every technology that's out there and kind of weigh the pros and cons. At least in the case of spinal cord injury, the cell repair approaches for putting the spinal cord back together, they're still not at a place that they can deliver the same kind of functionality that a neural interface can. Right, the more kind of electrical engineering approach actually delivered a functionality that is that much farther ahead. Now, does that mean that those two technologies will stay exclusive over time? No, I don't think so. I think down the road, as the cell and molecular approaches mature, you'll have some part neural interface, maybe to promote spinal cord repair and regrowth. You'll have the material science and cell molecular people putting their techniques in. And in conjunction, we will obtain solutions that are far better than either one individually. But those decisions, at least at the time, are very much driven by what kind of capability could one deliver given what the choices are at hand.
Got it.
Dr. G, anything to add?
No, I mean, he's absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that has been, if not a driver, I think certainly a guider, has been this concept of advanced integrative scientific convergence, the relative de-siloing of science and technology in those ways that are cooperative. And what tends to happen is the whole becomes somewhat greater than the sum of its parts. So if we just take a look at something like either spinal cord injury or brain injury, and we're looking, for example, at something like the use of even autopoietic stem cells or tissue transplants or gene grafts, do these work? Yeah. Are they highly limited? For sure. Can they then be capabilized, force multiplied through the use of bioengineering approaches that allow better scaffolds, better implants, and or control of the cellular, if you will, capabilities through the use of bioengineered microelectronic capabilities, functions, structures, devices? Yeah. So the way you have to really look at this is exactly as Justin depicted. It's not a question of being, quote, left-handed or right-handed with regard to the science and the tech, but how both hands can literally interoperably and interdigitatively help each other, and in so doing, do the task at hand in a much more ambidextrous and or polymath way. And I think we're beginning to see more of that de-siloing. But I got to tell you, although advanced integrative scientific convergences are certainly oriented at problem solution, what can also happen is when you start to put those scientific and technological means together, you get a whole new can of worms.
I think we're all looking forward to those can of worms, only because we're so hopeful that those silos will be broken down, right? And what comes of that, it becomes even more interesting. I think we're coming up on the end of the program. I do want to share screen real fast, and I do want to thank our speakers, Dr. Sanchez, Dr. Giordano, for joining us today, for all that you bring to the conversation and to the science, and want you to always feel welcomed here at the Society for Healthcare Innovation. Any new things bubbling up in your spaces, please let us know. And just thank you so much. We want to share from the society that we are hosting still our open hour in May, our Social and Journal Club, and our Innovation Frontiers 2022 conference in October. And we look to an EDGE in August that may involve some space medicine and some of the emergent technologies and science that's happening there. Thank you once again. Chris, do you want to close us out?
Yes, thank you very much, Lucia. Again, this was great. The top of the speakers and very, very stimulating discussion. I put the link for the forum because I think it was great, but people probably should give us honest opinions so we can do it better next time. If any of you wants to stay in touch with us for the future events, please just go to our website and join over there. And I'm glad that everybody enjoy, and I see you the next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.